When we're out in our adventure van, we want to spend as much time as possible out in the wild. And in order to do that, you need to be prepared. So today we're going to go over the recovery gear that we selected. By all means, we are not professional off-roaders, but this is what we selected. Maybe it'll help somebody. And also, if you have some information for us, let us know.
You have found Explorer Trek Adventure with Kelly and Greg. We cover everything camping, from backpacking to adventure vans.
In order to store everything, we ended up going with the Owl Monster Box. This is the biggest box they make. They have a small one, a large one, and then this one. I think the large one's about this big, but this is pretty big. When you buy the box, you have to have a way to attach it. And we went with Owl's B2 carrier, and that's this one that you can see here. And it attaches right down here and up here to the hinges. You do have to drill one hole in your door, but it wasn't too bad. And then the box itself attaches to the B2 carrier. Another addition to this box is it opens like a clam instead of a big door like the Expedition box. This one has two big, and when you open it, be a little careful because it's got spring loaded or strut loaded. And then the top opens up like this, and then here you can see there's a little pull tab. And the nice thing about this is now you have a work surface to work on. Well, we've seen some photos of people using a little cooktop here. So you're bringing your tool bag out, you actually have a place to put it instead of having to work on the ground. Before we had this, all of this stuff was living in the back of the van. And then in the back of there, we have that extra living space. And so this was totally getting in the way. So having this box has been a great addition. First important recovery item is a shovel. And this is the Harbor Freight shovel. It's super cheap. It's small enough where it'll actually fit in there. Having a full-size shovel would be nice if we can find a spot to put one. Maybe we'll put one up there. But in the meantime, this shovel is what we're gonna go with. You can use a shovel to dig yourself out in sandy situations where you may have buried yourself. There's also some secondary uses if you need to dig a cat hole or even like dig out a fire pit or anything like that. We've already been in several situations where we almost didn't make it through the trail. There was like one tree that was way down and Kelly had to guide us through. It was inches that we made it through, but we ended up getting a chainsaw. And this is what we ended up with. This is the Milwaukee Hatchet, and it's the M18, it's the bigger one, but it has this little tiny 8-inch blade. It almost looks like a toy, but this will cut you. The reason why we picked this one instead of getting a full-size chainsaw is, well, there's a couple reasons. One of them was safety. I like the way that you hold this versus a full-size chainsaw. Milwaukee does make a top handle saw, which is super nice and compact. For the most part, we think the size-wise of this little saw is gonna work. And one little tip, if you are looking at any Milwaukee tools, every once in a while they'll have a sale where they'll actually throw in a battery and a charger. I think this was $279 with just the tool or $299 with the charger and the battery. We happen to have a bunch of other Milwaukee tools, so that's why we went with this. But I think almost every cordless tool manufacturer has some kind of flavor of this. So whatever you have, go with that. We also carry this little handsaw from our backpacking kit, and this is the Silky F180. That's a nice little saw. It opens up and locks in place. It's got incredibly sharp teeth on it, so be super, super careful when you're using it. It is a little bit fragile. So when you're cutting, just try to make sure you're not going crazy with it, but it's good for small branches. The only thing to watch out for is it does not lock when it closes. So just make sure you're putting it somewhere where it's not going to open, start stabbing people. When you're out in the backcountry, you could be an hour or 2 or 3 or 4 away from help. And if you're working with saws and other kinds of things like that, we keep our first aid kit right in the door. And you can notice that it's quite large. And right, and the very first thing you get to is a trauma pack. And this has some quick clot in it. So if there was some heavy bleeding or anything like that, in theory, this is what you would want to use to stop it until you can get some help. This is a pretty standard first aid kit, although we did add a bunch of extra gauze pads. And we primarily did that because I watched a recovery and the guy broke his rope and the rope went flying and smashed through the window. And the one thing that they mentioned is they burned through like all their gauze because he was bleeding like crazy. So we added a bunch of other gauze pads in there. I also keep a tourniquet in my personal bag that we keep in the van. The most important thing with your first aid kit is make sure everybody in your party knows where it is and it's easy to get to. If you're having it inside there, they recommend you literally have it at eye view right when you walk in the door. But having it on this side pouch right here, everybody knows where it's at. In the bottom here, we carry a set of GoTreads, and these have two purposes. They're used as leveling blocks, so you don't have to carry extra leveling blocks if you want them, and they actually have been pretty handy. And they're also can be used as a traction board. They're definitely not as good as like an ActionTrax or MaxTrax, but it's at least an option. And they are a lot heavier and thicker than I was expecting them to be, so they actually should hold up very well. These GoTreads come in a version with 1, 2, 3 sections, but they also make one that comes in 4 sections. And if I had to buy them again, I would buy the 4-section version. It gives you a little bit more range if you're using them for traction boards, and then a little bit more height on the van if you're using them to level out. Next up, we have probably the heaviest part in here. And these are our recovery ropes and shackles. Got a little bit of different stuff in here. We have a Harbor Freight tree saver, and this can be used for multiple things, but what we would probably use it for is if we had to grab part of a vehicle, the undercarriage, could use that. Eventually, if we get a front winch, this will also come in handy. We also have in here a Harbor Freight soft shackle. These are actually pretty nice from what I've seen. They're all wrapped up. We also have another set of soft shackles. And probably one of the important parts here is a recovery hitch. This fits right into the rear hitch. This recovery point gives you a really nice place to hook onto on the back. The only problem is these vans don't have a really good spot for recovery on the front, other than this spot here where you can put in your tow hook eye. The problem is with this is they're really meant to be towed straight like you're using a tow truck. So try your hardest not to be pulling on an angle if you have to use these hooks. Last up in the recovery bag is the Yankum rope, and this is a 30-foot by 1-inch rope. You got to make sure you're getting the right size rope. You need to size the rope for the vehicle doing the pulling and not the stuck vehicle, which I actually thought was completely backwards. I'm pretty happy with how well this is made. This end is dipped to give it some more protection, and you can see that it's extra wrapped here where these come spliced together. The reason why we went with a Yankum rope versus there's a gazillion other just Amazon branded ones is we watched some guys doing some testing, and it really comes down to how this is braided inside. And you can't see that because it's all wrapped up. And the problem is when the guy cut a bunch of these ropes open, and it was kind of a crapshoot because they all said that they were braided a special way, but only like half of them were. Yes, these are more expensive, but it's kind of, we consider it a one-time purchase. Just buy the good one, be done with it. If you look up here, this is where we hold our traction boards. We went with the ActionTrax instead of the MaxTrax, and primarily because of the weight of the vehicle. This van, we took it over some scales, and it's about 8,500 when it's fully loaded, which is a lot. And MaxTrax, Jeepers like to use them because they often use them to like span gaps and that kind of thing. You're not gonna do that with this. And the ActionTrax are more able to bend and mold. If you go to the ActionTrax website, you can actually see a video of a giant Unimog running one of these things over, and you would think it would just shatter into a million pieces, but it actually completely bends like a taco and totally doesn't break. And that's kind of the reason why we chose these. These are remarkably heavy. I thought they were gonna be like twice as light as they were, but they're not. Currently we have 2, eventually we'll have 4. But right now they're sitting up on these agile off-road mounts, and that way it keeps them off the roof in case we want to put a box, which I think we eventually will up there, and it keeps them out of the interior. The 2 last items are one, the Garmin inReach. We just used the little guy, and it's the same one we use backpacking. We just keep that in the van, so when you're in the backcountry, if we have an emergency, we can hit that SOS button if needed. And the second thing is we use Onyx Off-Road to do all our mapping and mark our spots. It's super important to actually have backcountry maps that are not dependent on cell service. Otherwise, you're gonna get lost. One thing we discovered is there's a lot of roads that shoot off that aren't even on maps. One thing we like to do is we make sure we hit that little track button that kind of leaves a breadcrumb where you go, and you can always basically follow yourself way back out so you don't get lost. Hope you found that helpful. We will have links to everything we talked about here down in the description below. Go watch this video next. You can find us at Explore Trek Adventure, and we'll see you next time.